Creating a campaign is always a series of steps. Now, in our little series, we've already decided on basically the size of the adventure that we're going to do, as well as a general theme. And with those two things out of the way, there are a few more things we need to consider before we actually start writing. That would be the constraints of the system, the location we want the particular adventure to take place in, as well as what is the primary conflict and who or what is the nemesis of the player characters. So, my name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. So, when I say constraints of the system, what do I actually mean by saying that? Well, what we're actually talking about is we're talking about what limitations the system, as well as the world that you chose to put your adventure in, kind of puts on your story. So, in our particular example, we're using Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Pathfinder 2nd Edition has a very well established set of rules and subsystems that we can use. It has a very large background of lore that we can definitely pull upon, as well as additional information such as Lost Omens Pathfinder Society and Firebrands. Locations, also Lost Omens High Helm, as well as themes like Book of the Dead or Rage of Elements. There are many things that we can look at when we're trying to create our story, but that many options can also present a problem because you have so many options to choose from. You have to kind of be willing to edit yourself down to create a story that could make sense within the confines of the size of adventure you wanted to create. Now, if you are homebrewing your whole world, then you can create your own countries, your own factions, your own lore, your own subsystems, as well as potentially your own rules if you're going to create your own system or picking a system that you haven't already decided upon. However, these are the constraints that we are talking about what the system, world, and lore that you have chosen puts on the adventure you can put together. Next comes location. Now, we have already picked an adventure theme, and that was rebellion with a secondary of rescue. Because of that, it's going to kind of narrow down the locations that we can choose. However, you can also leave the world totally open and select a location, determine what's going on in that area, and then pick your story theme from there. It just depends on which way you want to go, and we decided to pick a theme first. So for us, going to the rebellion rescue thing that we're talking about, well, we have some locations that immediately come to mind. There are the River Kingdoms and the Outlaw Council, and potentially rebelling against a local version of the Outlaw Council in the 1 to 3 to 1 to 5 level adventure that we decided to do. Or you could go to Cheliax in the Thrune Ascendancy and try to overturn that if you want to do a full adventure path. But you do need to decide where you would like to go, as well as the scale of where you would like to go. Sure, you can pick the River Kingdoms, but I wouldn't suggest doing the full River Kingdoms, especially if you're just doing a small adventure. Your campaign world can vary from small, like a town or a city, to vast, a whole entire country or a continent. Now, small spaces like a town require a lot of consideration as to why and how the characters would stay there for a long time. Do you want to require the player characters to be from that particular town and therefore have ties, and that is why they stay in the location? Would you like them to come to that location as kind of a quest that brought them in, and that is why they are there? Or potentially they have friends that are at a location and they wrote them a letter, and that is why they came to the location. Or it could be a mix of all of those. It just kind of depends on what you would like your story to be and why you would like the player characters to meet at this particular location. Now, there's not a lot wrong with small spaces, even in a larger adventure. Small spaces can be very complex with politics, or they can serve as a gateway or a home base to larger areas, big areas of forest, to other cities around the location, or even to alternate dimensions. Then you can think about larger locations. Larger locations can have a continental scope with many stories unfolding in the world space, but it can be pretty overwhelming if you are trying to do a small adventure. So you'd want to choose your location where the story is going to take place based on the size of your adventure and how far and how long you wanted these player characters to exist in it. One thing to remember is that smaller locations need more complex characters, while larger locations require more characters or non player characters, but they can be less complex. In small, intimate games, non player characters are essential and they should have intriguing plans of their own to engage the players. Now, bigger scale games with frequent location changes, the NPCs aren't that important, so they can be less complex, but you should have them planned out and make them distinct so there isn't a lot of repetition. Now, from here, we can look at how to build the story. If you've played even one session, you know that player characters will find something interesting that you haven't planned for or that the GM has not planned for. Some side non player character that the party just finds fascinating, a location that seems really important to them, but you didn't give it a second thought when you created it, or an item that they might find on a creature that was just part of the table that you rolled for the GM, but it has some meaning to the player characters. This all requires some flexibility, improvisational skills, and a good set of rollable tables couldn't hurt for these random encounters. However, through all these little side quests and things that can draw attention to the player characters, you should have a central story or theme that leads to a conclusion. Now, there are two main ways to come up with this story. You can write a story from start to finish. It gives you incredible flexibility, a huge amount of latitude in your creative process, and very little constraints. With this, the possibilities are endless, but that can also be a hindrance. Unless you are very disciplined in your storytelling or have experience, it has a greater possibility to lead to a really convoluted story where the success condition might seem abrupt or out of the blue. The various locations in your adventure can seem very disconnected. The NPCs, be they the neutral ones in the city, town, or country that you're holding this in, or the hostile NPCs, can seem random unless you have the discipline to keep it all together. Now, the approach we're going to go with is one suggested from Guy Scandler's on the How to Be a Great GM channel and the Complete Guide to Writing Epic Campaigns. I think it would be very appropriate for the group story that we are looking at. What we are going to do is we are going to determine the enemy first and determine that enemy's occupation, goals, attitude, and stake. And that is OGAS is the acronym from Guy Scandler's. So let's kind of cover each one of those things a little bit. So the occupation doesn't necessarily mean are they a lawyer or a baker, although it could if you wanted a lawyer or a baker to be the evil person in your story. But it basically means are they the mafia boss? Are they a corrupt ruler? It reveals what their actions are going to be, what their potential possessions and resources are going to be, and what knowledge they may have. The second part of this acronym is the goal. Their goal can range from very simple, like cornering the outdoor market in their town, to complex, such as designing a world changing weapon. But this goal is what's going to be driving their purpose in the story. Next is their attitude. Now, their attitude influences how they interact with strangers, whether they're going to cooperate, whether they are going to be very disruptive, whether they're going to be very confrontational, and how well they stick to their goals and stay away from changing their minds and changing their objectives. And the last part of that acronym is the S, and that would be the stake. So the stake represents their determination and kind of their desperation to achieve their goals and to maintain the attitude that you have already set for them, as well as their likelihood to perform their occupation. Now, a low stake from an enemy implies that they have an indifference towards their job and their goal with really, really easy attitude changes, while a high stake signifies that they are going to stick to their goals, that they have a very high passion for their job, and their attitude is very unlikely to change. So, our steps for creating our campaign are recognizing the constraints, which we already have, determining a location where the campaign will take place, and then determining kind of the enemy, the nemesis, the point of conflict for the player characters as they come into the adventure. And that is what we're going to be covering over the next week. So I do hope you like this little campaign creation series. And if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.